Have you ever walked into a room and instantly felt the weight of emotions that weren't yours? Have you ever left a conversation feeling mysteriously drained, as if something essential had been pulled from your very core? If you're nodding right now, Carl Jung's final warning was written specifically for you. In his private journals, Jung documented something so disturbing about empaths that he hesitated to publish it. He discovered that highly sensitive people weren't just randomly attracting difficult relationships. They were being systematically hunted by what he called unconscious energy parasites. These aren't the obvious predators you might expect. They're often charming, wounded souls who seem desperately in need of healing. They mirror your depth, share their trauma with perfect timing, and make you feel chosen for your ability to understand their pain. But Jung uncovered something chilling. These individuals had unconsciously learned to survive by feeding on the spiritual energy of others. And empaths, with their radiant emotional availability, became their primary source. Think about your last draining encounter. Did that person seem genuinely interested in healing? Or did they somehow always steer conversations back to their crisis, their trauma, their endless need for your emotional labor? The feeding process is invisible. It happens through emotional manipulation disguised as connection, through trauma, bonds mistaken for deep love, through your own compassionate nature being weaponized against you. Jung realized empaths weren't attracting these people by coincidence. They were being actively hunted by those whose inner light had been extinguished and who could only survive by consuming the light of others. Your extraordinary sensitivity developed as a childhood survival mechanism. The child who could read every micro-expression, anticipate every mood shift, and absorb every unspoken emotion was the child who survived chaotic households. You became a human radar system for emotional danger. But here's the tragic irony Jung discovered. That same survival mechanism that protected you as a child now makes you a beacon for adult predators who've learned to exploit your gift. Your empathy isn't random neural firing. Your mirror neurons fire more intensely than average people. Your brain literally experiences others' emotions as if they were your own. But some people have unconsciously learned to exploit this neurological difference. They don't accidentally trigger your empathy. They strategically activate it. Jung documented the feeding process with terrifying precision. It follows 4 distinct stages, each more insidious than the last. Stage 1. Light recognition. Energy parasites can sense your emotional availability from across a room. They have an uncanny ability to identify empaths immediately. They recognize the glow of someone who gives more than they take, who feels deeply, who carries emotional responsibility for others. Stage 2. Wound display. The parasite doesn't approach with demands. They approach with pain. They share their trauma, their struggles, their deep emotions with perfect vulnerability. They mirror your depth while hiding their emptiness. Jung wrote that energy parasites have learned to become who you need them to be. Stage 3. Empathy activation. Once they've hooked your compassion, systematic extraction begins. They create crisis after crisis, requiring your emotional labor. They trauma dump without reciprocation. They make you feel special for understanding them when others couldn't. Jung observed that empaths mistake being needed for being loved. Stage 4. Depletion normalization. This is the most insidious stage. The parasite convinces you that feeling drained is proof of how deep your connection is. That exhaustion equals love. That your emotional overwhelm means you're highly sensitive rather than systematically depleted. But Jung discovered something even more disturbing. He called it shadow projection reversal. The energy parasite doesn't just take your light. They convince you that giving it away is your spiritual purpose. Think about this pattern. How many times have you felt completely exhausted after being with certain people, but told yourself you were being too sensitive? How many relationships have you maintained where you give endless emotional support but receive criticism when you need the same? Your body gives you clear warning signals. Sudden fatigue after interactions. Emotional overwhelm that seems disproportionate. Physical tension or brain fog around certain people. But instead of trusting these signals, you've been conditioned to dismiss them. This is what Jung called the gaslight of the unconscious. When someone's shadow convinces your consciousness that your intuition is the problem. Energy parasites aren't consciously evil. They're unconscious beings driven by what Jung called the shadow's hunger for wholeness. They sense in you what they've exiled in themselves, the capacity for genuine feeling authentic connection and emotional depth. But instead of doing the inner work to reclaim these qualities, they've learned to steal them from others. They feed on your emotional energy because they've cut themselves off from their own. They bask in your light because they've extinguished their inner flame. This creates what I call the psychological vampire effect. The more energy you give them, the more they need. The more you try to heal them, the more wounded they become. The more light you share, the darker their shadow grows. Not because they're inherently evil, but because they're psychologically incomplete. They've disowned their capacity for genuine emotion, so they must constantly consume it from external sources. Like someone with no digestive system who must keep eating, but can never feel satisfied. Jung recognized this as an archetypal pattern he called the wounded healer meets the shadow devourer. In this dynamic, you become trapped in what feels like a spiritual calling, but is actually psychological imprisonment. The empath's shadow isn't cruelty. It's the unconscious need to be needed. The addiction to fixing others because being useful feels safer than being seen. The terror of abandonment so deep that you'll accept emotional vampirism rather than risk being alone. This shadow creates what Jung called the impossible choice. You can feel their pain, their emptiness, their desperate need for the light you carry. Your compassionate nature wants to help heal, save them from their darkness. But Jung discovered something that changes everything. You cannot heal someone by letting them feed on your essence. You cannot love someone back to wholeness by allowing them to drain your light. You cannot save someone who is unconsciously committed to staying lost. Let me show you how this manifests in real relationships. The romantic energy vampire appears as the wounded soul who seems deep, sensitive, sharing childhood trauma, and struggles with perfect vulnerability. They make you feel chosen for understanding them. But within months, you notice constant exhaustion after conversations. They call during work with emotional crises. They trauma dump for hours without asking about your day. When you try to share struggles, they minimize them or make them about their pain. The family energy parasite has always been emotionally intense. They call with crisis after crisis, making you feel responsible for their well-being. If you don't answer immediately, guilt follows about abandoning them. They threaten self-harm when you try creating boundaries. Jung would recognize this as the devouring parent archetype, the one who feeds on their child's life force rather than nurturing it. The workplace emotional vampire monopolizes meetings with personal drama, seeks you out for lengthy support sessions, makes their dysfunction everyone else's emergency. They frame this behavior as sensitivity in a cold corporate environment, making your natural empathy feel obligated to provide endless emotional labor. Here's Jung's urgent warning. The longer you allow energy parasites to feed on your light, the more you begin merging with their shadow. You start believing their projection that you exist to serve others' emotional needs. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For empaths, this means recognizing that your compulsion to heal others often comes from your own unhealed wounds. The shadow side of empathy is the unconscious belief that you don't matter unless you're useful, that love must be earned through service, that your value lies in your ability to absorb and process other people's pain. This belief system makes you the perfect host for energy parasites. You provide endless emotional labor while convincing yourself it's love. You deplete your own resources while telling yourself it's compassion. You sacrifice your well-being while believing it's spiritual growth. But Jung discovered something revolutionary. Your light isn't meant to be consumed by others. It's meant to illuminate your own path toward wholeness. When you constantly give your energy away, you're not being loving. You're avoiding the terrifying work of learning to love yourself. When you focus obsessively on healing others, you're often running from the frightening task of healing your own wounds. The energy parasite becomes your enabler in spiritual bypassing. They give you someone to save, so you don't have to save yourself. They provide endless drama, so you don't have to face your own shadows. They offer you the role of martyr, so you don't have to claim the role of sovereign. Jung developed what I call the light method for protecting your essence without hardening your heart. L stands for learning to discern energy signatures. Jung emphasized the importance of feeling-toned complexes. Every person carries an energetic signature that your empathic abilities can read if you know what to look for. Energy parasites feel different in your system than healthy people. With parasites, you feel drained, anxious, confused, or emotionally hijacked after interaction. With healthy people, you feel energized, clear, peaceful, or inspired. Start documenting how you feel before, during, and after interactions with different people. Your body is a sophisticated radar system that can detect energy parasites if you learn to trust its signals. I represents integrating your shadow. Jung believed shadow integration was essential for psychological health. For empaths, this means owning the parts of yourself that want to be needed, that fear abandonment, that believe love must be earned through service. Ask yourself, what do I get out of being needed by broken people? How does rescuing others help me avoid my own healing? What childhood wound am I trying to heal through others? The goal isn't eliminating these tendencies, but making them conscious so they don't unconsciously drive your relationship choices. G stands for guarding your sacred energy. Jung wrote that your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakens? Protecting your energy isn't selfish. It's spiritual responsibility. This means saying no to emotional labor that depletes you, refusing to carry other people's unprocessed emotions, choosing relationships that nourish rather than drain you. Your energy is finite and sacred. Every moment spent processing someone else's shadow is a moment you can't spend growing your own light. H represents honoring your authentic nature. Energy parasites are attracted to empaths who dim their light to make others comfortable. The more you hide your gifts, deny your intuition, or minimize your sensitivity, the more you become a target for those wanting to consume what you're suppressing. Jung believed in individuation, becoming who you truly are, rather than who others need you to be. For empaths, this means owning your sensitivity as strength, trusting your intuition as wisdom, using your gifts consciously rather than unconsciously. T stands for transforming trauma into wisdom. Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This includes accepting that you've been targeted by energy parasites, not because you're weak, but because you carry something precious that unconscious people want to consume. Your empathic abilities developed as survival mechanisms. Now they must evolve into conscious choices. You can feel others' emotions without absorbing them. You can offer compassion without sacrificing yourself. You can help others without depleting your own resources. Jung identified 3 levels of empath development. Understanding where you are helps you progress toward true energetic sovereignty. Level 1. The unconscious empath. You feel everything, but understand nothing. You absorb others' emotions without realizing it. You're constantly drained, but blame yourself for being too sensitive. You attract energy parasites because you haven't learned to protect your gifts. At this level, your empathy controls you rather than you controlling it. You're like a radio picking up every frequency, but unable to tune in to specific stations. The solution is developing emotional boundaries and learning to distinguish between your feelings and others' feelings. Level 2. The conscious empath. You recognize your empathic abilities and begin using them intentionally. You can feel others' emotions without automatically absorbing them. You've learned basic energy protection techniques and can maintain some boundaries with energy parasites. At this level, you're beginning to see the difference between empathy and codependency. You can offer compassion without depleting yourself, but you still struggle with guilt when setting boundaries and sometimes slip back into old patterns. Level 3. The sovereign empath. You've integrated your shadow and own your empathic gifts as spiritual abilities rather than emotional burdens. You can feel deeply without losing yourself. You attract conscious people who reciprocate your emotional investment. At this level, your empathy becomes a tool for discernment rather than a trap for manipulation. You can sense others' authentic emotions versus their performed emotions. You can offer healing presence without taking on others' wounds as your own. The journey from unconscious to sovereign empath requires what I call the courage to disappoint. You must be willing to disappoint energy parasites who want unlimited access to your light. You must be willing to disappoint family members who've grown comfortable using you as their emotional regulator. You must be willing to disappoint society's expectation that empaths should be endlessly available for others' healing. But Jung's final warning about this transformation is crucial. Once you begin protecting your light, you can't return to unconscious empathy. Once you see the feeding patterns, you can't unsee them. Once you taste energetic sovereignty, you can't return to emotional slavery. This knowledge will cost you relationships. It will challenge your identity. It will force you to confront the parts of yourself that would rather be needed than respected, that would rather be useful than authentic, that would rather be depleted than alone. Energy parasites will escalate their feeding behaviors when they sense you're becoming unavailable as a source. They'll create bigger crises. They'll threaten self-harm. They'll accuse you of being cold, selfish, or not the person they thought you were. They'll try to guilt you back into the feeding dynamic by reminding you of their pain, their trauma, their need for your support. Jung called this the extinction burst of the shadow. When parasites can no longer feed easily, they become more desperate and manipulative. This is actually a sign that your boundaries are working, but it feels like evidence that you're being cruel. Stay strong during this phase. Remember that their escalation is about their addiction to your energy, not about your value as a person. The healthy people in your life will respect your boundaries and even celebrate your growth. They'll understand when you need space support your healing journey and reciprocate the emotional energy you invest in relationships. When you protect your light, you don't diminish it, you amplify it. When you stop letting others feed on your energy, you have more energy available for your own growth, healing, and evolution. The empath who learns to guard their gifts doesn't become less compassionate. They become more discerning. They learn to offer their light to those who can receive it without depleting it, appreciate it without consuming it, match it without dimming it. Jung's final warning wasn't just about protecting yourself from energy parasites. It was about claiming your birthright as a conscious being who chooses how to use their gifts rather than being unconsciously driven to give them away. Your sensitivity is not a curse to be managed. It's a superpower to be mastered. Your empathy is not a weakness to be hidden. It's a strength to be wielded consciously. Your light is not fuel for others' darkness. It's illumination for your own path toward wholeness. The energy parasites Jung warned about can only feed on unconscious empaths. When you awaken to your true nature, when you learn to protect your essence while sharing your gifts, When you become sovereign over your own energy field, you become immune to their feeding mechanisms. That's the ultimate protection. Not walls that keep everyone out, but consciousness that lets only love in. Master this distinction, and you'll never again confuse being drained with being loved, being needed with being valued, or being depleted with being devoted. Jung's warning was clear: they're feeding on your light. But his promise was even clearer: you have the power to stop them. If you recognize yourself in this warning, share in the comments what boundary you're ready to set to protect your light. Your story might be exactly what another empath needs to hear to begin their own journey toward energetic sovereignty. The world doesn't need more burnt-out healers. It needs awakened empaths who know the difference between love and enabling, between compassion and codependency, between service and self-sacrifice. You are not a resource to be consumed. You are a soul sovereign and seen. Jung documented cases where empaths literally aged faster than their peers. Not from natural causes, but from what he termed energetic hemorrhaging, the constant outflow of vital force to those who couldn't generate their own. Sarah came to Jung's practice appearing decades older than her chronological age. At 35, she had the exhaustion patterns of someone twice her age. She'd spent 15 years in a marriage where her husband's emotional volatility required constant management. She'd become his human anxiety medication, his walking antidepressant, his personal emotional processor. Jung observed that Sarah's life force was literally being consumed. Her creativity had dried up. Her dreams had become gray and lifeless. Even her physical vitality was depleted. She caught every cold, struggled with chronic fatigue, and had developed stress-related health conditions. But the most disturbing part wasn't the physical toll. It was how Sarah had been conditioned to believe this depletion was love. She'd been taught that a good wife absorbs her husband's negativity, that a loving partner never sets emotional boundaries, that true intimacy means unlimited emotional availability. Jung called this the martyrdom delusion, the unconscious belief that suffering for others is spiritually noble. But he discovered something that shattered this illusion completely. When Sarah finally left her marriage and began protecting her energy, something miraculous happened. Her vitality returned. Her creativity exploded back to life. Her health improved dramatically. Most importantly, she began attracting people who actually nourished her rather than depleting her. The man she thought she was saving through her sacrifice. He found another empath within months. Someone else to absorb his unprocessed emotions. Someone else to serve as his personal emotional waste disposal system. Jung's revelation was devastating. The energy parasite doesn't change when you sacrifice yourself. They simply find their next host. Jung discovered that empathic depletion often runs in family lines. The grandmother who gave everything to an alcoholic husband. The mother who sacrificed herself for emotionally unavailable children. The daughter who inherited both the empathic gift and the unconscious programming to give it away. This isn't genetic. It's learned helplessness passed down through modeling. Each generation watches the previous one demonstrate that love equals self-sacrifice, that boundaries are selfish, that empaths exist to serve others' emotional needs. Maria traced her pattern back 3 generations. Her great-grandmother had been the family's emotional caretaker, managing her husband's rage and her children's trauma from poverty and war. Her grandmother continued this pattern, becoming the family's designated worry carrier and crisis manager. Her mother had learned that being needed was safer than being seen, that usefulness guaranteed survival, that emotional labor was the currency of love. And Maria had inherited this entire blueprint unconsciously. But Jung helped her understand something revolutionary. Inherited trauma doesn't have to become inherited destiny. The pattern can be broken, but only through conscious choice and deliberate action. The awakened empath becomes what Jung called the pattern interrupter. the one who stops the generational cycle of emotional vampirism and begins modeling conscious relationship instead. Many empaths fall into what Jung termed spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid the hard work of setting boundaries. They convince themselves that setting limits isn't enlightened, or that protecting their energy isn't compassionate. Jung observed empaths who would quote spiritual texts about unconditional love while allowing themselves to be systematically drained. They'd speak of serving others while neglecting their own basic needs. They'd pride themselves on being selfless while unconsciously resenting everyone they served. This spiritual martyrdom complex actually prevents genuine spiritual growth. Jung wrote that true spiritual development requires what he called conscious selfishness, the wisdom to care for your own soul's evolution first so you have something authentic to offer others. The empaths who achieved genuine spiritual maturity in Jung's practice weren't the ones who gave the most. They were the ones who learned to give consciously, selectively, and sustainably. They understood that their spiritual gifts required protection and cultivation, not endless expenditure. Jung challenged the popular notion that empaths should offer unlimited compassion to everyone. He discovered that this belief actually enables unconscious behavior and prevents genuine healing. When you offer endless emotional support to someone who refuses to do their own inner work, you're not being compassionate. You're being an enabler. You're allowing them to remain unconscious while using your consciousness as a substitute for their own growth. True compassion, Jung realized, sometimes means saying no. Sometimes it means allowing others to experience the natural consequences of their choices. Sometimes it means refusing to rescue someone from lessons their soul needs to learn. The empath who learns this distinction becomes what Jung called a conscious healer, rather than an unconscious enabler. They can offer genuine support to those ready to grow while refusing to enable those committed to staying stuck. Jung developed specific techniques for empaths to reclaim energy that had been drained over years or decades. He called this process energetic archaeology, excavating the parts of yourself that you'd given away to others. The first step involves what Jung termed energy inventory, identifying where your life force goes during a typical day. Most empaths are shocked to discover how much energy they spend processing other people's emotions, managing other people's reactions, and carrying responsibility for other people's feelings. The second step is energetic boundaries, learning to distinguish between your emotional experience and others. Jung taught empaths to visualize their energy field and practice containing their essence rather than letting it spill into everyone around them. The third step involves conscious re-entry, deliberately choosing which emotional experiences you'll engage with and which you'll observe without absorption. This isn't coldness, it's discernment. Sarah, after implementing Jung's techniques, reported feeling solid for the first time in decades. She could still feel others' emotions, but she was no longer drowning in them. She could offer support without losing herself. She could care without carrying. When empaths begin protecting their energy, their entire social circle transforms. The energy parasites gradually disappear, unable to feed on someone who's no longer unconsciously available for depletion. But this transition period can be terrifying. Jung warned empaths that they might experience profound loneliness as their old relationships fall away. The people who were attracted to your unconscious giving won't be interested in conscious reciprocity. However, nature abhors a vacuum. As the depleting relationships end, nourishing ones begin. You start attracting people who can match your depth without draining your resources. You discover friendships based on mutual support rather than one-sided caretaking. Jung called this the great sorting, the natural process where conscious beings attract each other while unconscious ones are repelled by the inability to exploit. The quality of your relationships becomes a direct reflection of your relationship with yourself. When you value your own energy, others learn to value it too. When you protect your gifts, others appreciate rather than consume them. Jung warned that the transition from unconscious to conscious empath often involves what he called the dark night of awakening, a period where you might feel completely lost. Your identity has been built around being needed, being useful, being the one who gives endlessly. When you stop playing this role, you might not know who you are anymore. The people who once sought you out no longer call. The drama that once filled your days disappears. This emptiness isn't failure, it's space. Space for your authentic self to emerge. Space for relationships based on genuine connection rather than need. Space for your own dreams and desires to surface after years of focusing on everyone else's. Jung observed that empaths who navigated this transition successfully often discovered incredible creative gifts that had been buried under years of emotional labor. When you stop processing everyone else's feelings, you have energy available for your own self-expression. The artist who finally paints after years of managing family drama. The writer who finds their voice after ending an emotionally vampiric marriage. The entrepreneur who builds their dream business after leaving a job where they were everyone's unofficial therapist. Jung's vision of the evolved empath wasn't someone who stopped caring, but someone who cared consciously. The sovereign empath can feel deeply without losing themselves, offer support without depleting themselves, and love powerfully without sacrificing themselves. They become what Jung called conscious mirrors, reflecting others' truth back to them without taking on their pain as personal responsibility. They can witness suffering without becoming it. They can offer healing presence without becoming the healer. Most importantly, the sovereign empath understands that their sensitivity is a spiritual gift that requires protection, cultivation, and conscious direction. They use their empathic abilities like a skilled surgeon uses a scalpel, precisely, purposefully, and with clear intention. This doesn't make them less compassionate. It makes them more effective. Instead of drowning in the ocean of human suffering, they become lighthouse keepers, beaming steady light to guide others toward their own healing without abandoning their post. Jung believed that conscious empaths were crucial for humanity's evolution. In a world filled with unconscious people acting out their trauma on others, empaths serve as translators, bridges, and healers. But only if they remain conscious themselves. The empath who becomes depleted, bitter, or closed-hearted serves no one. The empath who maintains their sensitivity while protecting their essence becomes a beacon of what's possible. You show others that it's possible to feel deeply without being destroyed by feeling. You demonstrate that compassion doesn't require self-sacrifice. You model what healthy boundaries look like in practice. This is your true spiritual service. Not endless giving, but conscious being. Not self-sacrifice, but self-sovereignty. Not martyrdom, but mastery of your gifts. Jung's final message to empaths was both a warning and a promise. The warning, your light will be consumed if you don't learn to protect it. The promise. When you master your gifts, you become a force for healing that the world desperately needs. The choice is yours. Will you remain unconscious prey for energy parasites? Or will you awaken to your true power as a sovereign empath? Your evolution isn't just personal, it's planetary. Every empath who awakens to their power helps shift the collective consciousness toward greater awareness, healthier relationships, and authentic love. The world is waiting for empaths who know their worth, protect their gifts, and use their sensitivity as a conscious tool for healing, rather than an unconscious invitation for exploitation. Comment below if you're ready to make this shift. I choose sovereignty over sacrifice. Your declaration might be the inspiration another empath needs to begin their own journey toward energetic freedom. Jung's observations about empath exhaustion have been validated by modern neuroscience. Research shows that highly sensitive people have elevated levels of stress hormones when exposed to others' emotional distress. Your nervous system literally treats others' emotions as threats to your own survival. Dr. Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive people confirms what Jung observed clinically. When empaths encounter emotional intensity, their amygdala, the brain's alarm system, activates as if they were personally under attack. Your body floods with cortisol and adrenaline, preparing you to fight or flee from danger that isn't actually yours. Over time, this chronic activation creates what Jung called empathic burnout syndrome. Your adrenal glands become exhausted from constantly responding to others' crises. Your immune system weakens from perpetual stress hormone exposure. Your sleep patterns disrupted by carrying emotional residue that doesn't belong to you. Jung documented cases where empaths developed mysterious physical ailments that disappeared once they learned energetic boundaries. Chronic headaches that vanished when they stopped absorbing others' mental chaos. Digestive issues that resolved when they quit taking on others' anxiety. Autoimmune conditions that improved when they reclaimed their own emotional space. Your body keeps the score of every energetic violation, every boundary crossed, every time you've absorbed trauma that wasn't yours to carry. The physical symptoms aren't separate from the emotional drain. They're your body's desperate attempt to communicate that something is fundamentally wrong with how you're using your empathic gifts. Jung discovered that many empaths were unconsciously addicted to crisis and drama, not because they enjoyed suffering, but because chaos provided a sense of purpose and identity. When life became peaceful, they felt empty and worthless. This addiction manifests as what Jung termed savior complex, the compulsive need to rescue others from their problems. The empath becomes dependent on being needed, on being the hero in others' stories, on being indispensable in dysfunctional dynamics. Lisa came to Jung's attention because she couldn't maintain any relationships that weren't built on crisis. Whenever she dated someone emotionally stable, she felt bored and restless. She unconsciously sabotaged healthy connections while clinging to chaotic ones that required constant emotional labor. Jung helped her understand that she'd confused intensity with intimacy, chaos with connection being needed with being loved. Her nervous system had become calibrated to dysfunction, interpreting peace as abandonment and stability as rejection. The withdrawal from crisis addiction can be severe. Jung observed empaths experiencing depression, anxiety, and existential emptiness when they stopped playing rescuer roles. Their entire identity had been built around being useful in emergencies, so when the emergencies ended, they didn't know who they were. Recovery requires what Jung called tolerating the void, learning to sit with emptiness without immediately filling it with someone else's crisis. This void isn't actually empty. It's full of potential for your authentic self to emerge. Jung identified a disturbing pattern where energy parasites project their own abandoned qualities onto empaths, then punish the empath for carrying what they themselves had disowned. The narcissist who rages at the empath for being too emotional while using the empath to process all their own feelings. The avoidant partner who criticizes the empath for being needy while depending on them for all emotional connection. The family member who calls the empath selfish for setting boundaries while exploiting their endless giving. These projections are particularly damaging because they target the empath's core identity. You begin to believe that your sensitivity is a flaw. Your boundaries are cruel. Your needs are excessive. You internalize the very judgments that keep you available for exploitation. Jung called this gaslighting of the soul, a systematic assault on your reality that makes you doubt your own perceptions, needs, and worth. The energy parasite convinces you that their comfort is more important than your well-being, their feelings more valid than yours, their needs more urgent than your own survival. Breaking free from these projections requires what Jung termed radical self-validation. trusting your own experience even when others invalidate it, honoring your own needs even when others call you selfish, protecting your own energy even when others accuse you of being cruel. Jung understood that protecting your empathic gifts requires spiritual warrior qualities. The courage to disappoint others, the strength to stand alone, the wisdom to choose battles consciously rather than automatically responding to every emotional emergency. The spiritual warrior empath doesn't avoid conflict. They engage it consciously. They can say no without guilt, set boundaries without apology, and prioritize their own healing without shame. They understand that their first spiritual duty is to their own evolution, not to rescuing others from theirs. This path requires dismantling the noble suffering mythology that many empaths carry. The belief that pain equals growth, that struggle proves worthiness, that sacrificing yourself demonstrates love. Jung discovered these beliefs actually prevent spiritual development by keeping you trapped in victim consciousness. True spiritual warriors take full responsibility for their energy field. They recognize that allowing others to drain them doesn't serve anyone's highest good. They understand that martyrdom is spiritual immaturity disguised as holiness. Jung cataloged different levels of energy parasites, from unconscious drainers to predatory feeders. Understanding this hierarchy helps empaths recognize the severity of different situations and respond appropriately. Level 1. The unconscious drainer. These people don't intentionally harm you. They simply haven't learned to regulate their own emotions. They dump their feelings without malice, but also without consideration. They can learn better patterns if lovingly confronted. Level 2. The entitled taker. These individuals believe they have the right to unlimited access to your emotional labor. They become angry when you set boundaries and interpret your self-care as abandonment. They resist change, but aren't actively malicious. Level 3. The manipulative feeder. These people consciously exploit empathic tendencies through guilt, shame, and emotional manipulation. They study your triggers and use them strategically to maintain access to your energy. They escalate tactics when boundaries threaten their supply. Level 4. The predatory parasite. These individuals actively seek out empaths to exploit. They're skilled at mirroring depth while hiding emptiness, creating trauma bonds that feel like soul connections. They're dangerous because they can sense and target your specific vulnerabilities. Jung emphasized that empaths must learn to identify these different levels and respond appropriately. Compassion might transform a level 1 drainer, but it only enables level 3 manipulators and feeds level 4 predators. Jung believed that empaths serve a crucial function in the collective unconscious. They process emotional material that the broader culture has repressed or denied. Your sensitivity isn't personal pathology. It's psychological service to the collective. However, this service becomes destructive when it's unconscious. The empath who absorbs collective trauma without awareness becomes mentally ill, carrying burdens that belong to the entire culture. The empath who takes on family pain without boundaries becomes the identified patient in dysfunctional systems. Conscious empaths learn to serve as emotional translators and healers for the collective, while maintaining their own psychological sovereignty. They can feel the pulse of cultural pain without taking it on as personal responsibility. They can witness collective shadow without becoming it. This requires what Jung called conscious participation in the collective unconscious, engaging with larger patterns while maintaining individual identity. The awakened empath becomes a bridge between personal healing and collective transformation. Recent neuroscience has validated Jung's observations about empathic neurological differences. Mirror neurons in highly sensitive people fire more intensely and frequently than in the general population. You literally experience others' emotions in your own nervous system. This neurological gift allows you to understand others at depths most people can't access. You can sense the pain behind someone's anger, the fear beneath their aggression, the longing underneath their coldness. This makes you incredibly valuable as a healer, counselor, and emotional translator. But this same neurological wiring makes you vulnerable to those who would exploit your automatic empathic responses. Energy parasites learn to trigger your mirror neurons, intentionally creating artificial intimacy that feels real but serves their agenda rather than genuine connection. Protecting yourself requires learning to control your mirror neuron firing, feeling what's useful while filtering out what's harmful. Jung called this conscious mirroring versus automatic absorption. You can choose what to reflect and what to deflect. Jung identified a particularly insidious form of energetic parasitism he called trauma bonding, where shared pain creates the illusion of deep connection while actually serving the parasite's need for emotional supply. The energy vampire shares their trauma, strategically creating artificial intimacy that hooks your compassion. You feel special for being trusted with their pain, chosen for your ability to understand their darkness. This feels like soul recognition, but is actually psychological manipulation. True healing relationships involve mutual growth and reciprocal support. Trauma bonds involve one person doing all the emotional labor, while the other maintains their victim identity. The empath gives endlessly, while the parasite takes without transformation. Breaking trauma bonds requires recognizing the difference between genuine vulnerability and performed pain. Authentic emotional sharing leads to healing and growth. Manipulative emotional dumping maintains dysfunction and prevents change. Jung observed that empaths often mistake intensity for intimacy, drama for depth, and pain for authenticity. Learning to distinguish between these creates the foundation for healthy, empathic relationships. Jung developed the concept of an energetic immune system, the empath's ability to identify and neutralize psychological toxins before they penetrate your essential self. Like your physical immune system, this requires both recognition and response. Recognition involves learning the early warning signs of energetic invasion, the subtle shift in your energy when someone begins feeding, the feeling of being emotionally hijacked during conversations, the inexplicable exhaustion after certain interactions. Response requires immediate protective action, setting verbal boundaries, ending conversations, physically removing yourself from draining environments. Your energetic immune system must be both sensitive enough to detect threats and strong enough to neutralize them. Jung taught empaths to develop what he called energetic antibodies, specific responses to common forms of emotional manipulation. When someone tries to guilt you into endless giving, you have a prepared response. When someone attempts to make their crisis your emergency, you know how to deflect. This isn't coldness. It's spiritual self-defense. Your empathic gifts are too precious to be squandered on those who would consume rather than appreciate them. Jung discovered that empaths' greatest spiritual lesson often involves learning to say no without guilt, explanation, or apology. This simple word becomes a sacred boundary that protects your essential self from dissolution. The sacred no isn't aggressive or angry. It's clear and final. It doesn't require justification because your energy is your sovereign right. It doesn't need explanation because others' understanding isn't required for your protection. Many empaths struggle with no because they were taught that declining others' requests equals abandoning them. Jung helped his patients understand that saying yes when your soul screams no is actually a form of lying to yourself and to others. The person who benefits from your depleted yes doesn't actually receive your authentic gift. They receive your resentful compliance, your exhausted service, your diminished presence. The sacred no preserves your capacity for genuine yes when the right opportunity appears. Jung created what he called the empath's Bill of Rights. non-negotiable principles for protecting your empathic gifts while honoring your human needs. You have the right to feel without fixing. You can acknowledge others' pain without taking responsibility for healing it. Their emotions are information, not instructions. You have the right to space when overwhelmed. Retreating to process your own energy isn't abandonment. It's essential maintenance. You cannot serve from an empty vessel. You have the right to choose your emotional investments. Not every crisis deserves your energy. Not every person merits your empathy. Discernment is wisdom, not coldness. You have the right to your own emotional experience. Your feelings matter as much as anyone else's. Your needs are as valid as those you typically prioritize above your own. You have the right to growth and change. You're not obligated to remain the same person others need you to be. Your evolution might disappoint others, but it's necessary for your soul. You have the right to reciprocal relationships. Energy exchange should flow both directions. Relationships built on your endless giving aren't relationships. They're exploitation. You have the right to your own life path. Your empathic gifts don't obligate you to sacrifice your dreams for others' comfort. Your calling matters as much as anyone else's needs. Jung emphasized that these aren't selfish demands. They're spiritual necessities. The empath who honors these rights becomes more capable of authentic service, not less. Jung's final challenge to empaths involves integrating your shadow, the parts of yourself you've disowned in service of being good, helpful, and selfless. Your shadow contains your power, your boundaries, your capacity to disappoint others when necessary. Many empaths have exiled their anger, their selfishness, their ability to say no. These rejected parts don't disappear. They go underground where they sabotage your conscious efforts to serve others. You might give with surface sweetness while harboring deep resentment. You might help with conscious willingness while unconsciously punishing those you serve. Integration requires reclaiming these shadow qualities consciously. Your anger becomes discernment. Your selfishness becomes self-care. Your capacity to disappoint becomes the ability to maintain authentic relationships rather than performing for others' approval. The integrated empath can access their full emotional spectrum without being consumed by any single feeling. They can be loving without being naive, compassionate without being depleted, sensitive without being defenseless. This integration transforms you from unconscious empath to conscious healer, from automatic giver to discerning server, from emotional sponge to spiritual warrior. You become dangerous to systems built on unconsciousness and invaluable to those committed to growth. Jung's vision of the awakened empath represents humanity's next evolutionary step. Beings capable of feeling deeply while remaining sovereign, of serving powerfully, while maintaining wholeness, of loving completely while protecting what's sacred. Your journey from unconscious empathy to conscious service isn't just personal healing. It's planetary transformation. Every empath who awakens to their power shifts the collective toward greater consciousness, healthier relationships, and authentic love. The world needs your light, but it needs your protected light. Brilliant, sustainable, and consciously directed toward those ready to receive and reciprocate your gifts.